Coming up on this week's show, the original Tomb Raider games are back.
A Nintendo classic returns better than ever.
And we get the story of Obsidian with Matthew Fassberg.
And the Retro Hour podcast is brought to you every Friday with our incredible mates at Bitmap Books. Now here's a question. Who is your favourite character in Street Fighter Alpha 2? Because that is just one of the games it features in their amazing book, Super Nintendo and Super Famicom, a visual compendium. And reprints are due next month. So you can get a reminder and check out the rest of their retro gaming collection at bitmapbooks.com. And with our mates at PCBWay. Now, of course you know PCBWay. They offer fully featured custom PCB prototyping with low-cost, fast turnaround quality boards. And they offer services like 3D printing and injection molding. And you know they're massive supporters of the retro community. So get an instant quote right now on their website at PCBWay.com. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 397. Your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And a very warm welcome to the podcast that every Friday takes you on a nostalgic trip back to the classic age of video games, brings you up to speed on what's been happening in the world of retro from over the last 7 days, and of course brings you a veteran of the industry onto the podcast in the second half for an in-depth interview and more on today's guest in just a bit. But welcome back, Ravi. Sick Boy is back.
Cheers. Well, thank you guys for covering. That was really nice. And Ashley did such a good job, coming on. It was really fantastic. But now you guys are starting to get along. I can hear it a bit in your voice, Dan, and I know Joe's been out for the count for quite a while as well.
Yeah, I'm like, Ravi's definitely got a better immune system than me because you got over it a lot quicker than me. I'm like 2 weeks into this, but
oh geez,
yeah, it's been a slow burn for me. It hit you like a bus, but it hit me like more like a pedalo. So it's been a slow one for me, but I'm here powering through. But yeah, man, glad you're feeling better, Ravi. We missed you.
Yeah, and you know what? I felt a bit weird. I'm like, oh my god, I haven't been on the podcast. I've got to get some like retro game chatting on.
Well, it's nice to have you back. Obviously, Ravi's now completed the man flu. Joe's on about level 7. Yeah. I think I'm at level 1 by the sounds of my throat today. So, everyone's come down with it recently. But, we're getting into that time of year. This is our last show of September. And about a month from now, it'll be dark at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, digging out the horror games for Halloween, all of that to come. And our big episode 400 coming up in a couple of weeks as well. So more on that as we get ready for the 400th episode celebrations. But today, we have got an amazing guest. Now, we're going to be covering the story of a game called Obsidian. And when I mentioned this to you, Ravi, you were very excited about this. You were a big fan of this game back in the day.
Yeah, so, many people may not know this game as it was quite underrated, but it's of that great period where you came from CD-ROM and you went into like FMV games, and there was a lot of kind of integration of FMV, and it came from Rocket Science Games. And Rocket Science Games, they did Lodestar on the Sega CD, and a lot of the kind of graphics and stuff were all rendered with Silicon graphics machines. They had these beautiful sequences in there. But Lodestar was more of a kind of play along as you go movie, whereas Obsidian was a whole world, and it does remind me of Myst quite a lot, but a lot more complicated. There's a lot more elements of FMV in there, and it's a bit more developed. And today's guest is all about this kind of era and the whole FMV era. It's a really interesting chat.
Yeah, so we're going to be joined by Matthew Fassberg. He's our guest this week, and he was the project lead on Obsidian. And you're right, that came around a couple of years after Myst, but from all the reviews I've seen of this game, everyone thinks it's really underrated, and it really should be regarded, as a classic, that kind of, cult-like status that Myst has got. A lot of people reckon it's a much better game, and it recently got re-released, actually, a couple of weeks ago, so it's a very good time to get Matthew on to give us a story of it, and also to hear about Rocket Science Games as well, because I remember them being a pretty big player for a few years. They're only around from, I think it was 93 to around 97.
Yeah, they did the Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, the second Cataclysm as well, and Rocket Jockey, Wingnuts. Also, strangely, they had Elon Musk working there as well. So there's quite a few, I think David Fox was as well. There's quite a few, huge people in the video game industry that were working there.
And they really did sit on that kind of like a seesaw really between the Hollywood side of the business, because a lot of people had a movie background that worked there, and the gaming side of it as well, which was a big balancing act, you know, trying to balance it between the people that want to make really playable video games and the ones that just wanted really flashy FMV graphics as well. And had a bit of a sad end as well. So we do hear all the story of that really short-lived company, but definitely left a big impact. Rocket Science Games, we hear about Elon Musk working there as well, and the cult classic Obsidian and its rebirth for 2023 with this week's special guest, Matthew Fassberg. He's coming up on the show in around half an hour from now. Now, of course, before that, first half of the podcast, we like to do little roundtable chats about what's been happening in retro from over the last 7 days, and plenty to catch up on this week. It's been a busy week as we gear up towards Christmas. I think, you know, a lot of big releases are going to be out over the next couple of months, including something that's actually bizarrely going to miss the Christmas market, which feels like a bit of a missed opportunity. But the first 3 Tomb Raider games are going to be back on modern consoles with what looks like a really nice, if quite subtle, upgrade.
Really nice. Ooh. I'll come back to that in a minute.
Okay, Joe, we might have a differing opinion on this.
We may have differing opinions, but yeah, this was announced about a week ago. Funny enough, it's part of the Nintendo Direct, but it is going to be on all main consoles. And like you say, it's not coming out until February 14th, 2024. And, you know, let me get this straight before I start kind of, not bad-mouthing it, but before I kind of give my opinion on it. I probably will buy it. You know, it's Tomb Raider, isn't it, at the end of the day? And I've got a lot of love for Tomb Raider 2. And Tomb Raider 3, funny enough, was the first pirated game I ever had. Interestingly.
You need to buy this then. You owe the developers some money now.
I owe the developers. Yeah. But, I mean, I was going to ask, what do you guys think of the art style? Because it reminds me of the final Tomb Raider games before it got rebooted.
I like it. You know, I've always felt Tomb Raider 1, you know, that came out on DOS back in the days, and also on the Saturn. Yeah. And, you know, it was clunky. It was kind of tough to play. I remember certain areas and levels I wasn't able to find, like the ledges and areas to get into. The camera angles were pretty horrible at some points. And, you know, I've seen lots of people replaying it on Twitch and stuff, and I've had a little replay myself on the PC version, which is a bit better because you can do some changes on there. But I think this is much needed, and I kind of like that they've kept the kind of textures a bit warpy and a bit kind of that traditional vibe. I think it's definitely a game that needed a remaster. The original's still great, but just for new players to kind of experience it.
Yeah, well, this is Tomb Raider 1, 2, and 3 remastered, which is interesting because this comes from Crystal Dynamics, who actually did that Tomb Raider Anniversary reboot, like remaster, back in like 2007, I think it was originally on the PC, and then it came out on Xbox 360, PS2, PS3 as well. Some people have speculated that this is basically that, just kind of upgraded, but actually it looks quite different. I think graphically, I mean, as Ravi said there, this doesn't look like a full, you know, modern remaster with like all shiny new graphics. Really, it looks like quite a subtle change, like more smoothing out those original polygon graphics. Obviously, they're upscaled into, you know, 1080p at least, I'd imagine. But I think, yeah, I mean, it would kind of ruin the vibe of the original games, I think, if it went full on kind of, you know, AAA standard graphics for modern consoles. But what you can do with this, kind of like, you know, the Monkey Island remakes, is there is a button where you can look at like kind of the modern improved graphics, or you can go back to the original polygon graphics of the, you know, the first few games, like PlayStation 1 style as well.
That's nice.
I always thought even Tomb Raider 2 was a step too far. I was like, that's too modern. Tomb Raider, the original. that's
Tomb
kind
Raider
of my jam.
Is the cutoff for retro.
Yeah,
for
that's it.
But you got the butler in Tomb Raider too, when everyone loves locking him in the
modern
fridge,
butler.
But that is one thing I'm quite interested to see, because, I mean, there is a trailer that you can watch on YouTube. It's 34 seconds long. Not a lot of detail about the gameplay, but I'm thinking from what I've read, most people think this is going to be kind of as the original games were, with those old school tank controls as well.
Yeah.
Because some people have pointed out in the comments that, you know, some people are like, well, I hope they've improved it and it's a modern control scheme. But they are right that when they did that 2007 remaster, they had to change some of the puzzles in the game because they wouldn't work with different controls.
And I wonder if some of the moves that she does like 2 or 3, they improved on some of the acrobatics and like the moves you could do. If they're going to implement them into Tomb Raider 1, like kind of Sonic Mania.
That's interesting.
Well, Spin Dash style, not Sonic Mania.
I know
Sonic Jam, that was the one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, actually. I didn't think of that. It crossed my mind about the tank controls and kind of modernizing them and stuff like that, but I didn't think how much that would affect the puzzles in the game, because when like Resident Evil games have been re-released and remastered and stuff like that, they've put options in there, like on the Resident Evil 1 and 0 remastered it in like 2015. They made it so you could turn the tank controls off. You could flick between the tank controls and modern controls. But obviously Resident Evil doesn't have any platforming in it, so that didn't really cross my mind. But now you've mentioned it, it might actually change the gameplay significantly.
And some of the vehicles were so hard to drive as well.
Well, yeah, there is that as well. But I do like, just reflecting back on what you both said, I do like the textures, and you've kind of sold it to me now. I was a little bit like, I mean, like I say, I was going to buy it, but you've actually sold the graphical enhancement to me, because with the textures, I didn't really think about that. And you know what? I was just rewatching the trailer now, and it really does. When they turn the better graphics on, the HD graphics on, it really emphasizes how many square platforms there was in like ancient Japan.
Well, that's the thing. I think it's that, it's a rose-tinted spectacles, isn't it? You often imagine these games look better. I mean, in my mind, looking at this remastered version, that is how the PlayStation 1 version looked, until I see the PlayStation 1 graphics again. I'm like, oh yeah, it was actually quite
Try
janky.
the Saturn version,
I've got the Saturn version as well. But I mean, I'm hoping they leave some of the glitches in there. Like, it wouldn't be Tomb Raider 2 if the butler didn't kind of glitch through the fridge door. The stuff like that I hope they kind of leave in there, because
they should have just done that for the trailer. Everybody would have bought it.
I think the puzzle solving, if they've got the puzzle solving as well as they did before, and if it's as tricky to do, then that's going to keep me engrossed.
Yeah, and I mean, I've been meaning to play the original Tomb Raider games again for a while, so I think this will be a nice way to do it.
Yeah, definitely.
So, yeah, they're going to be, hopefully, no word on pricing yet, but I imagine there probably won't be that much. Usually when you get these kind of trilogy packs, you pay the price of one game for 3.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping it's going to be about 25.
And also, I hate to say this, but, it's always with Tomb Raider. They haven't gone crazy on the assets, as they say. Usually with later Tomb Raider games, they went a bit mad. And she seems proportioned sensibly. Yeah,
we know what you're talking about, Randy.
Yeah.
Very subtle, very subtle. So it looks really good. Actually, no word on if there's going to be a physical release of this. I think that would be quite cool. I mean, it would make sense if it's going to be kind of a collector's edition. That would be quite nice to have a physical. But at the moment, it looks like it's only going to be digital downloads. But of course, we'll keep an eye on that, and I'll put that trailer in our show notes as well. Now, speaking of games that are getting a rebirth, as it were, this one is just really an expansion pack for a classic game that was a little bit controversial back in the day. I've heard different pronunciations of this. I've always called it the Great Gianna Sisters, but I know some people call it the Gianna Sisters. I don't know which side of the fence you guys fall on.
Gianna.
I'm not sure. Maybe Gianna.
I always say Gianna. Well, I say always. I've probably spoken about it twice in my life, but yeah, Gianna Sisters.
Well, of course, famously, this was basically a Super Mario ripoff that came out on home computers back in 1987, very briefly, before it got pulled off the shelves. And obviously, if you get hold of an original version of that game, goes for crazy amounts of money these days. I remember when we had Chris Hulsbeck on the show, he kind of told us a story of the fact that there wasn't a Nintendo lawsuit, which seems to be the kind of common consensus. It was more Nintendo sent like a threatening letter or a cease and desist.
Yeah.
So I don't think it actually got to the stage where it went to court.
No, you don't mess with Nintendo, though. When you get that letter, you're like, okay.
Yeah, more than enough to frighten anyone to take a game off a shelf. But obviously there has been several new games of the Gianna Sisters / Gianna Sisters over the years. And remember there's one on Kickstarter a few years ago that was quite good from memory that came out on modern consoles. I remember there was even one on the Ouya, I've got a feeling. So there have been some kind of official ones, one on the 2DS as well, I believe. But now, this looks like a great new pack of levels for the Commodore 64, and this is called the Gianna Power Edition, because I didn't actually realise this. There was a Gianna Sisters construction kit.
Oh, cool, like Mario Maker or something.
Oh, it's nothing like Mario, Ravi. Of course not. If Nintendo's always listening.
I thought you were being serious. I'm like, no, nothing like that. No, but I know what you mean now. I got the joke. It took me a minute.
You're not well, Joe. We'll let you off. But yeah, I mean, this looks really cool. So basically, this is a collection of some fan levels. There are 16 of them that have been made with the construction set, the new Power Edition of this, and you can download this for free and play these new levels on your classic Commodore 64. And I've got to say, looking through the, I haven't played them yet, but I'm looking through this, there's like a 6-minute YouTube playthrough video that you can watch, and there is, the levels look really well designed, actually. I'm not sure whether there is some new sprites in here as well, whether they're part of the construction kit. I mean, I haven't played the original game for a long time, but it looks like there are some like new enemies in here. Unless my mind's playing
It's always good to see one of these older titles, updated and getting some extra levels.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, it's it's a kind of game where, like Mario, basically, you make a new level and it feels like a new game, doesn't it? So it does make a big difference. So it's nice to have these to play on your Commodore 64, and that is available to download for free right now. So I'll put that in our show notes as well. Now, something else that is waiting for me this weekend on my Nintendo Switch, because Nintendo put this up on the Nintendo Switch Online Play, if you have that, if you pay for Nintendo Switch Online annually, as I do. And this is F-Zero 99. Basically, the classic SNES racer now has a massive online multiplayer mode.
I mean, I'm pleased to see this. Like, I've played Pac-Man 99 and Tetris 99 briefly, because I've only ever had Nintendo Online for like a month when I did it for free when I first got my Switch. I think I might have done it twice. I did it when I first got my Switch, and then a few years later they sent me another trial thing, so I did it. As you guys know, I don't play my Switch very often, but yeah, this is really cool to see, because we haven't had an F-Zero game in 20 years. That was the last time Nintendo put an F-Zero game out, which was F-Zero GX. I could be wrong. There might have been a Game Boy Advance one slightly after that, but I know there hasn't been like a mainline title. F-Zero's just not been getting any love other than Captain Falcon being in the Smash Bros. Games, consistently.
I think, when Mario Kart came along, it's kind of like Nintendo put all the focus on that.
Yeah, I mean, we did get an F-Zero game on, obviously on the SNES, which is what this one's based on, and then on the N64, and then on the GameCube, and then that was it. Nothing for the Wii U, or Switch until now. But yeah, by the looks of things, very similar to Tetris 99 and, Pac-Man 99.
It looks Mode 7 still. It's like they've kind of replicated the Mode 7 vibe. But the thing I love about this is it's free, which is great. And if
you pay for the service.
99 players, which is insane. I don't know if you guys have ever played like a game with that many people on one map at the same time. There was this, I think it's like Descenders or something, but it's this biking one where you go down a hill, and I think we used to have 30 people on that, and that's absolute mental chaos. Like 99 on a small track like this, it's just going to be mad.
It is pretty mad. I mean, there's some kind of like, some power-ups they've put in there, which creates like a ghost track above the track, so it kind of like separates some of the players. So I guess that kind of helps with how messy it is.
The congestion.
Yeah, with the congestion, with the traffic. Yeah, can you imagine that? Playing F-Zero, but I was stuck in traffic.
Bloody traffic jam. I've been here half an hour.
Yeah, but yeah, it plays the same as, the difference between this and the Pac-Man and Tetris 99s is, as Ravi's just said, you're all on one map. It's not like Pac-Man 99 where you're all playing your own game of Pac-Man or your own game of Tetris, and then as it gets harder, as people lose, they get eliminated. This is all on one track on one map, and obviously you're all just get smashing into each other, getting killed off, and then every time you do a lap, it knocks, I think, like 5 players off. So it's like when it first starts, the bottom 5 players of those 99 will be eliminated. So, which to me sounds like, oh yeah, I'd smash that. I'd be in the top 20 every time. But you know what? I said that when I played Pac-Man 99 and I wasn't. So
rage quit after that.
Yeah, it would just be so much fun just seeing someone like just crash or fall off the map and like, what's that guy doing as you're going round,
Yeah. But like you say, Ravi, they've captured the Super Nintendo graphics of this, so it's based on the original graphic style, and it looks like that Mode 7, but it just looks beautiful. Like it's like pixel perfect. I've been watching some of the gameplay, 'cause like I say, I've not played it. I've watching the gameplay. Doesn't appear to be any slowdown or anything like that either, which is really nice.
Yeah, and all the reviews I've seen, people are loving it. And I've downloaded it on my Switch this afternoon, so I look forward to giving it a try this weekend. And probably coming at 99th out of 99 players know my gameplay skills. So knocked out in the first round. But yeah, looks loads of fun if you are a Nintendo Switch Online subscriber. That is available for download now. Now, some exciting news for Spectrum fans, because someone has actually made a nice little replacement here for the micro drive. Now, I know that whenever the micro drive is mentioned to Sinclair fans, there's generally one reaction, that is a bit of a shudder. You familiar with micro drives, Ravi?
No, I'm not that much of a specky guy. You know, I had a few friends that had Spectrums, but didn't have that much experience. I think I've seen a few micro drives around though.
We had Nigel Searle on the podcast, didn't we, a few years ago, who worked alongside Clive Sinclair. And I remember him telling us the story about the ill-fated Sinclair QL, of which, for some reason, I've got 2 Sinclair QLs in my collection. No Spectrum, but I have got 2 QLs.
The Quantum Leap.
Yeah, that was it, yeah, which wasn't much of a quantum leap, despite that advert with Sir Clive jumping over all the other machines. But basically, the micro drive was a halfway house between cassette tape and floppy disk. So basically it was a much cheaper alternative to a floppy drive, you know, because obviously whenever they could save a penny or two, that would generally be the Sinclair way.
Yeah.
And they bundled these. It was basically a loop of tape. So you put these small little wafers, I think they were called, or just cartridges. Basically a cartridge with a loop of tape in there that you'd insert into a very small drive. I mean, they're only about the size of, maybe a bit bigger than a full-size SD card. Okay. Quite small. Very delicate, though. That's the thing about them. And I mean, I've got a few micro drive cartridges for my Sinclair QL, most of which have kind of got bits of them kind of falling off now, or the tape doesn't work too well. So that was a big problem, that they weren't very reliable. And obviously putting that into a system like the QL that was aimed at the business market, that was a death knell for it. You know, no business was going to trust their data on a micro drive.
So this was for saving data on then? It wasn't...
Saving and loading as well.
Oh, and loading. So would you get games released on the micro drive?
Yeah, there was software available on it, and that's the thing. I mean, looking through my Sinclair QL manual, it came with 4 programs included, like a word processor, a database, a spreadsheet was in there as well. But actually it says the first thing you should do before you even attempt to use them is make a backup and don't use the originals, you know, because they're that delicate. So it wasn't, you know, a very popular storage medium.
It wasn't built to last, basically.
No, exactly. But actually a guy called Derek Fountain has made a modern micro drive emulator that basically uses SD cards instead of the micro drive. Now, the only problem is usually, because I mean, there've been a few of these over the years, but what you generally needed to use these on a Spectrum is an interface called a ZX Interface 1.
Okay.
That gives the Spectrum serial and network and, you know, expansion ports that it doesn't have. But they're becoming hard to find, those original models. So basically Derek's decision is to make an emulator that is completely standalone. So this has got everything you need in there, and it plugs directly into the Spectrum expansion port, and of course that using the power of the Raspberry Pi.
It looks like this uses 3 Raspberry Pis in there.
Yeah. 3 Raspberry Pi Picos inside here. So basically it emulates the ZX Interface 1. It's got the ROM of that on there as well. And then the interface, it goes via the Spectrum's bus. And then the final one emulates a micro drive, essentially, and lets the user, you know, communicate with the SD card. So it looks like, you know, a really tidy solution that I imagine is not going to be all that expensive to make. Because, I mean, I've seen recently, I was reading a copy of a Linux Format magazine, which... you know, so I still buy paper mags, like to support them. And they were saying in the latest issue that, you know, there is now a massive influx of Raspberry Pis again into the market now.
Okay, that's good. So yeah, because they're being used for absolutely everything now.
Yeah, and also we had that big component shortage during COVID and stuff a couple of years ago, but it looks like that's finally getting sorted out now. So they are becoming more readily available and hopefully at reasonable prices. Because I did buy a Raspberry Pi 3B for a Pi Storm on the Amiga when mine broke about a year ago. I think I had to pay about 70 quid for it, which was nuts because, you know, I paid like 20 originally a couple of years back. So now that these are becoming more available again, I think this looks like a really nice solution because that's the thing. I mean, if you've got software on micro drives that you want to back up, or basically, I mean, it is quicker than using a cassette tape on a Spectrum.
So it would work like a GoTech or something. You just select, you select the image, load it up, and then it thinks it's a micro drive.
Yeah, so I mean, he's put it all up on GitHub as well. It's all open source. So if you want to check it out, and there is a great little YouTube video as well, giving like a really detailed review and a teardown of it too. So I'll link that up in our show notes as well. But yeah, it looks really cool if you're a Spectrum fan and want your games to load a bit quicker than off cassette tape. A new micro drive replacement available now. Now, you guys were getting excited about F-099. I'm more excited about this. Alien vs. Predator on the Atari Jaguar is now playable with up to 32 people on multiplayer.
They are missing a trick by not calling it AVP32. But yeah,
there you go.
Yeah, this is awesome. This is based on the original Jaguar version, not the PC or kind of like later Xbox 360 versions or anything like that. But it's my understanding. You guys have just clarified this to me before we started recording that this isn't on the original hardware. This is through emulation and kind of like networking, isn't it?
Well, it's this emulator that we've talked about before, the Big PMU or Big PEMU, I'm still not sure how you pronounce this, by Rich Whitehouse, who we seem to cover this, every like 2 or 3 months at the moment. An emulator that's only been around, I believe it came out back in 2021, so still pretty new. And obviously there's been some big introductions, big features in there recently. We covered the Atari Jaguar CD support, the VR compatibility that we mentioned a while ago as well. There's also the JagLink, which was the Atari Jaguar network solution, was introduced in version 1.08 of the Big PMU. But there is a new version of it that literally just came out about 10 days ago at the time of recording this, version 109, that now brings basically 2 new methods to network Atari Jaguar games. Now, one is called State Sync, and the other one is Script Mode. And what he's done is, basically there is it looks like a bit of a hack of the original game, because the original Alien vs. Predator is just a single-player game. There wasn't actually any multiplayer play in there at all. Even though, looking at the short demo that Rich has uploaded onto Twitter, or X, if you want to call it that, it looks like it makes a really good deathmatch style game. So the script mode actually looks like you implement your netcode in there and it enables games to be online supported. So basically using this script mode in here is essentially added 32-person multiplayer support to Alien vs. Predator.
And I just say it wouldn't be called Alien vs. Predator 32. It'd be 64, Joe. Do the math.
Yeah. Do the math.
But no, I think this is really cool because it's a game that never had that option in there. It never had that multiplayer option. And the idea of taking a kind of single player title and then adding in more players online, I think that's pretty awesome. But he's going to struggle to find 32 players, I guess. But maybe there'll be like, Atari Age or like a Jag community would all get together at one time and then test this out.
That needs to happen because I think this sounds like so much fun. He said he hasn't tested over 30 yet in a single game, but he's done a little demo here of like a 2-player split screen. But he reckons theoretically there could be 32 players in there. He said expect bugs, because obviously this is quite a new feature that he's put in here as well. But really, the exciting news about this is with the Big PMU version 109, it basically means that there is network multiplayer for any 2 to 8 player Atari Jaguar game. So it enables online support.
Atari carts, Stan. You're going to go mad on that.
Yeah. Atari carts 99, that's what we need.
We should do it for a Christmas video. Us all playing this online. Yeah, it's interesting because it's like you say, this was never designed for multiplayer. So it's weird to think like how the game would react to it, if that makes sense. Because there isn't like a deathmatch mode for 32 people to go on. So I guess it would just be the standard campaign with like 32 of you, just like, when one alien comes after you, which is usually quite a tough game, all of a sudden it's like 32 colonial marines with shotguns.
I guess as long as you've got the map as well. And if there is some kind of editor for the maps, maybe he could start creating multiplayer maps that would, accommodate people more.
But I think it's always cool when you get emulators that kind of open up what were previously like just, couch co-op games online as well. Because I love playing, some of the like Amiga games like Chaos Engine and stuff on there. So it's like Antstream. I can play it with my brother who lives 300
Amiga
miles.
Live's really good for that as well.
Is it Kasumi Ninja?
Yeah.
A bit of that online.
The awful Mortal Kombat rip-off on the Atari Jaguar. So I think it's going to be the next big thing, Joe. So I love this emulator as well. I mean, it just seems like Rich is working so hard on this and kind of going above and beyond as well, because it feels like it's already pretty damn good. But now that he's introducing stuff like VR support and JagLink as well, definitely sounds like he's giving this a lot of love. So that new version is available now if you want to test that out. And we'd love to hear if anyone manages to get a 32-player Alien vs Predator match going. Please do give us an invite. Of course, there is all our details on our website to get in touch. Right, then we're going to be joined by this week's special guest talking about Obsidian with Matthew Fassberg. He's coming up in just a moment. And now that we are almost into October, that does mean we're getting close to another Patrons Hangout, which, of course, is always a highlight of the month. We just had one last weekend that was really good. Chatting about all kinds of things, like we always do in there.
A Red Dwarf. There was quite a lot of Red Dwarf chat.
There was sci-fi shows. I mean, this is basically, if you haven't joined us on one of the Hangouts before, it's when we invite all our patrons to come on basically a giant Zoom call. And we normally do it on the last Sunday of the month. So if you get in there now, you'll get invited to October's. And we do it 2 hours on a Sunday evening. We'll have a couple of drinks, just geek out about all things retro, share a bit of advice, show off our retro pickups as well. Basically like a massive users group. It was a lot of fun to do. So if you want to join this month's Hangout, now would be a very good time to join our Patreon community. And we're getting ready to record the next episode of the second podcast that we do.
The Retro Hour After Hours.
So I think some people think we just do 51 episodes of this a year. And there's another 12 episodes of the second podcast as well.
Yeah.
We do everything.
And that one's often longer than our supposed hour.
Yeah. So, I mean, some of them are like, God, we wang on for like 2 hours on some of those. But the latest one is covering our favourite licensed games as well. So the After Hours really, really varied show, and we're getting ready to record the new episode of that for October in the next week. So a very good time to join us on Patreon. And of course, the reason you're doing it really is to make sure that we can continue bringing you this podcast every single Friday. Helps us pay for all our costs, server costs, audio costs, equipment, everything like that is covered thanks to our wonderful patrons community. And we do have 2 new members to induct into the most prestigious high score table in the world of retro gaming. And that is, of course, the Retro Hour Hall of Fame. And I'll let you guys induct the latest members.
Hall of Fame.
Who have we got, Ravi?
Peter Clark.
And Richard.
Thank you so much for your support, guys. It really means a lot to us. And if you'd like to join the patrons community, all the details to sign up right now are on the website, theretrohour.com. Right, then we'll have more news for you on next Friday's show. But next, we're going to get the story of Obsidian and lots more as well. Rocket science games, working with Elon Musk on video games back in the day with our special guest, Matthew Fassberg. He's coming up next on the Retro Hour podcast. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it is time to welcome on this week's very special guest. And we can't wait to get some stories about a really interesting, albeit short-lived company that were around in the 90s. It was a really interesting mixture of Hollywood and the video games industry, and we're responsible for some really innovative games, including, obviously, the legendary Obsidian that we'll be talking about very soon. So let's welcome on this week's very special guest, Matthew Fassberg. How's it going, Matthew?
Going very well. I just got some exercise, swam some laps. I'm energetic and excited to talk about Obsidian.
Oh, well, I appreciate the preparation there. Sounds like you're pumped up to go.
Yeah.
Well, brilliant. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us. Now, before we get into kind of, your career, and obviously we'll go into Obsidian that's been released again on modern platforms so people can play that again and maybe missed out back in the day. I'm always interested to kind of find out with our guests where their journey began. I mean, do you remember what initially got you interested in computers and gaming? I mean, where did your journey start from?
Okay. I need to be clear on this. I wasn't that interested in video games when I got the job. Basically what happened was, but I got interested. I was working in film and video for many years, and I had a lot of, I would call myself a generalist. So I had been a post-production supervisor. I had been an editor. I had done sound design. I got into editing on an Avid system, which was the first computer-based nonlinear editing tool that came out. I had worked for photographers. I had really done a lot of different things. And I connected with a friend from college when we both got our first email addresses in early 1993. And we're like, and both of us had done a lot of this. And we were like, what are we going to do? Because we're not specialists, we're generalists. And 3 weeks later, he calls me back and goes, Matt, I live in the Bay Area. There's something called multimedia. It's exploding. And they need people that understand all aspects of creating media and audio and sound. And he was right. And I got in touch with a headhunter, and Rocket Science was just starting. And they were both getting ready. They were just developing the company, and they were raising a fair amount of money, and they needed to make promotional material and videos explained who they were. And I flew out for an interview, and they said, listen, join us and we'll immediately use your video and film skills to make media for us. And over the time that we're ramping this up, you'll get a chance to learn about computer animation and producing it and how it works, and play some video games. I did not grow up playing video games at all. And I can't remember how old at the time, but I got into it. So I moved out and I helped them make videos and promotional material. And then the guys so Rocket Science's thing was, we're a mixture of Hollywood and Silicon Valley. And the animators that they had just started, who were experts and had just worked on Star Wars and films like that, started teaching me about how it works to design animation in 3D and the different programs you could use. I was already using Photoshop, but programs like After Effects were just coming out and really launching. And so there was a time when I was helping them making their promotional and business materials, and I was learning how to produce. And the first game we worked on was Lodestar.
Were people kind of confident in FMV at the time, or was it seen as like just a kind of plaything for people to practice on or train up?
Here's how I can explain it. Coming from where I was coming from, I think they thought that full motion video was the only style of game that would allow them to take advantage of the Hollywood beautiful imagery, well-designed and well-executed. I think they thought they needed to use FMV to showcase that, because they were working with, art directors and people that worked on films. And I think they thought the FMV method or game style would allow them to showcase that. Of course, once you reduce it to what platform are you on and how quick can the data move through it and how quickly do you want to move through the world versus see the world, then it became more of a negotiation of how quickly do we move through the world and what does it look like? And that was part of the process that we had to navigate as we were developing the games.
And do you think the association of having like Lucasfilm Games and, big companies involved in gaming help give it some credential and, get more people involved?
Well, we got, look, we were on the third, Wired magazine had just come out and we were the third cover of Wired magazines. There was an article and we were featured. And certainly the association in those years with Lucas was fantastic. I mean, but we all know how you throw up a name, someone who's famous or a company that's famous and whose credentials are, and it makes people interested. So yeah, it definitely helped. And the people we had on the engineering side, the people that came from the engineering side, Bruce Leak, our head engineer, had developed QuickTime. One of the guys that ran the company, Peter Barrett, had come up at the age of 18, I believe, with Cinepack, which was the first video compression software that existed, and it went at all the Macromedia software. And so there were kind of rock stars in the company on both sides of the equation, and it helped us get a lot of attention. Absolutely.
And I imagine then as well, obviously with the birth of full motion video, it kind of coincided with, CD-ROM becoming like a new established mainstream medium as well around 93, 94. And you mentioned that first game that you worked on there, the Lodestar, The Legend of Tully Bodine, that also came out on the Sega Mega CD as well. So, I mean, what memories have you got of working on that project, and what did you think of the Sega Mega CD as a platform?
Well, first of all, I should say this. We're going back way far. So as far as me judging the platform, I look at that platform in the context of the years that went by and how many platforms came about. And so I don't really have a judgment about that particular platform, I just remember during the whole cycle of the company, different platforms were coming out, and it became an issue because unlike film or making music, at the end of it, you end up with a file. And whether you take or some imagery, and whether you put it on VHS or DVD or put it on film and project it, it's the same stuff. Same with music, MP3, 8-track, cassette, CD, it's the same music. But you get into making something that's interactive like a game, and when you go to a different format, the engineers have to get involved and refigure out how you're going to present it, and each platform has technical and engineering issues you have to solve. So I just recall over the years of the company trying to figure out what platform we should focus on. Obviously, we had the deal with Sega, so we focused on that platform, but it became an issue in general of like, oh, now people want to put games on PCs, and then the Macs were there too. So we had those two things. And I just recall it becoming an issue in general, not specifically for rocket science, but in general, like what platform is each company going to make the games for? And
around then you had so many different ones. I mean, CDI, 3DO came along briefly, Atari Jaguar, and there's so many different ones on the market every 6 months back then.
Yeah, and it became an issue. Like we couldn't make it an issue because we had been funded by Sega, so of course we veered towards their platforms. But in the industry in general, it was like, oh, are we focused on the right platform? And did a better platform just come out, and now nobody's focused on Sega? So among the things we had to navigate, some of it was internal to the company, and teams were together, but some of it was external, like, are we on the right platform, and did that change over time? So looking back, I don't really have a judgment around that particular platform. It's more like the subject of platforms became an issue in general.
What about working on Lodestar then? What memories have you got of that first game?
Well, that was the game that brought about, that showed to me the issues that started to become the issue for rocket science in general, which is we've got two sides of the company. First of all, as producer, your job is to make, whether it's departments, engineering, artists, designers, work together. And the two main sides were the people engineering the game and making it work, and the people making the art for the game, and not just pieces of art, but the video. And what you had was a little bit of a battle of how complicated and interesting should this game to be from a gameplay side, and how good should this game look from the Hollywood side. And basically, I was immediately thrown into a little ongoing negotiation where our game designers, Brian Moriarty and David Fox, who had deep history in designing games, were saying, hey, you're making us oversimplify the game design because of the quality and resolution of the visuals you're trying to show. And you keep scaling it down, but we believe that our game players would play a very simple looking game. If it was very interestingly designed, they're not going to care. They're going to want to like the interactivity. Meanwhile, the Hollywood side, if I can call it that, the ILM side was going, wait, the whole mission of the company is to have these games look fantastic. That's our calling card. And so we went back and forth, and I think the game that eventually got released, the version was, for many game players, too simple, but it looked fantastic. So when it got released, the game designers like, really, guys, you've made a checkers game, and people want to play a chess game. The Hollywood side of the company, if I can call it that, was going, but it looks fantastic, and we've hired real actors, and we shot this with a crew, and all the ships we designed look fantastic, and they're texture mapped to look very cool. And so I just recall it being a battle or a negotiation to try and keep both sides happy. And I think, because I don't think the game did that well, I think the Hollywood side sort of won out in the equation, and the game designers were somewhat disappointed with the simplicity of the game they were asked to deliver in those cases.
And that must have been tough for them as well, because Brian Moriarty and David Fox as well, some of the best games designers in the world, and having something that's kind of like an interactive movie, it must have been hard to get that balance. But eventually, with the format, it worked out. I can imagine these things happen in the early days of formats.
Yes, exactly. So, we just went on to the next round and started other games. But, I got to say, a problem with Rocket Science, or a challenge, would have been how much attention they got for this Hollywood meets Silicon Valley equation, and the being on cover of Wired magazine. Sometimes people look for things to fall when they're overhyped. So I think there were a lot of eyes on Rocket Science going, you guys really going to do this? Because you really have been blowing your horn pretty darn loud. So when the games came out and they didn't meet the quality level on the game side that had been promised, I think a lot of people were like rolling their eyes going, all right, these guys did not think this through. And it became an issue.
And speaking of people that worked on Lodestar, am I correct in thinking that Elon Musk was involved in that game?
You know what? I don't think he was. He wasn't particularly involved in that game. I think I know he was there because it always comes up. Hey, Elon Musk worked at Rocket Science. I think he was engineering in a more general way. I know that I can say openly, I don't recall interacting with Elon Musk or knowing him. But keep in mind, we had these bays. So we in Berkeley, we were on the vanguard of no one's going to be in a separate room. We're going to have, which is now the common thing, is you have these big rooms where all the engineers and artists are just in little cubicles, but they can see each other's machines and walk around. So we had a lot of people in there, and I did not interact with him, but I know for sure he was there working on engineering for a little while.
Yes, he's credited on a couple of games there, Lodestar, and also Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, the second Cataclysm. He's credited on that game as a tester as well, it says, on Moby Games. I know you were involved in that title as well. I mean, what was your role on Cadillacs and Dinosaurs?
I was not the main producer. We had teams that were on each game, but then we traded artists or let our artists be used on other games. So I probably helped produce certain aspects of that game or art for it. Or I also got involved, again, on my video side, making video ads for the games that were used to promote it. I did not directly work on developing Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, but also the engineering, because it was the same type of rail game where you're just on a track going through a universe that's, nice to look at. They were using a lot of the same engineering, a lot of the same programming, and putting in different art. Because one was Lodestar in outer space and one was Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. So, we were very collaborative between teams. So I can't remember specifically how I worked on Cadillac and Dinosaurs, but there was a lot of interactive work between the teams on all the games.
So let's talk about Obsidian. I mean, obviously, if people think of the games that you guys made back then, that is kind of the standout title. Definitely a game that's definitely got a cult following these days, and as I mentioned, is available to play again on Steam and Zoom platforms. Got released a couple of weeks ago, and we'll talk about that in a second as well. But I'm quite interested to hear about the initial idea for Obsidian, because am I right in thinking that was kind of your first, like the biggest project that you worked on back then when you were at the company?
Well, yeah. Let me say two. I'm going to go into two directions. That one is the idea of doing a game like Obsidian, and then the game specifically. I think Myst came out and became very popular, and I think we looked at it, and because it moved at a slow pace and you were exploring worlds, it became a kind of game where we could really make things look beautiful and do some storytelling. So between making things look fantastic and introducing storytelling to the equation in a deeper way, that really hit the Hollywood side, if I can say, of the Rocket Science thing. And they thought, oh, this is a kind of game where we really can take advantage of the kind of quality of storytelling and artwork that we really wanted to show that we could do. So they were attracted to that. And then there were a couple of artists in the company, a guy named Mark Sullivan and Rich Cohn, who had worked on film effects and film visuals and were super talented. They went off and on their spare time designed a bunch of characters and some scenes and worlds and made this painting, which is ended up being on the cover, I believe, of the it was the cover of the Obsidian game box, and it became what the Obsidian thing was this rock, this thing that evolved in the wilderness. They came up with that, and they said, "Hey guys, we want to pitch a game." So we had a meeting again in one of our big bays, and they showed the work, which we people looking were blown away, and then they explained the game. And when they explained the game, these guys were not gamers. I mean, they played Doom like the rest of us when we could on the Silicon Valley, on the Silicon gaming machines. They played games with us, but they weren't super gamers. And their game idea wasn't nearly as strong as their artwork was. And so in the room at the time when they made this pitch was a guy named Adam Wolf, who had just graduated from Harvard. He was pretty young and was just helping out in general around the company in many different ways. And he found me after the meeting and said, "Matthew, I can make that into a game. I can come up with a game idea for that. And I'd like an opportunity to do that." And I was open to that. I mean, Adam was super smart, and I knew we needed to go in a more interesting game direction. And so we also had at the company a guy named Scott Kim, who designs puzzles, visual puzzles and word puzzles. He already had a book out at the time of writing of words that you could turn upside down, and it said the same word or said another word. I mean, he's very evolved in his puzzle world. And then I knew someone named Howard Kushner who had done some screenwriting in Hollywood. And we thought, God, between Adam and Scott and Howard, we've got some cooks that could cook up a nice game design, which they did. And so we went in that direction. And that became sort of the team that evolved the game. And I think Rocket Science thought, this is the kind of game that can really showcase what we're capable of doing. One of the issues was how late in the both financial spending direction of the company and how much bad press we had gotten for releasing some games in which the gameplay was not that admired. So we really had a challenge to hit something straight out of the ballpark, which I think we did. If you look at the reviews and you look at the game, we did hit it out of the ballpark. But I'm not sure at that time we still got the promotion and advertising push that we would have gotten earlier in the company's cycle, because I think people might have been growing a little bit cynical about the potential for Rocket Science to release fantastic games.
It really kind of changed the interactivity. So, Myst, when that originally came out, it was quite like a slideshow. There were interactive elements in there, but this one you had a huge FMV, amazing rendered sequences. There must have been a lot of people working on it. I know it was around 5 CDs, big, which was quite a lot of detail.
Yes, and we worked with Thomas Dolby and his team at a company called Headspace at the time. Thomas Dolby is one of those people that's always on much like Todd Rundgren, both of them focus on cutting edge technology in music and interactivity. And Thomas and that brought us some attention as well, because Thomas Dolby was, still is, but at the time was pretty hot. And so that brought more attention to the company as well. And we were working with a company called Empath in the engineering side. So we were really trying to go in some interesting directions about how we made the game happen and the attention it would get.
Kind of bringing it back to Myst, when that game came out, it was very well praised, but I often found a lot of the puzzles in there were a little bit cryptic. And obviously, when you're playtesting something and designing a game, I imagine there is that fine balance between designing a puzzle that needs, logical thinking and creativity, but keeping them fair and making sure that players are going to be able to figure them out. I mean, what was that kind of balancing process like of designing them?
Well, there was a lot of back and forth. I mean, we did a lot of testing. We had people come in. We had a room in the company where people could come in, and we had a big mirrored wall where it looked like they were looking in a mirror, but on the other side we could watch and we could record it. And we did a number of tests where we had people come in and just play a chunk of the game and see how they liked it. And it was a challenge, an interesting challenge to dial in, make this hard enough that it's interesting, but make it solvable enough that people can move ahead through the game. So there was a lot of play testing that we did. Of course, we had our own testing group that was just making sure the game worked. But we made sure that people came in fresh who had never played the game, didn't know anything about it, and tried out the puzzles. And there was several times we did that and trying to dial in exactly where can we hit the right spot there.
Do you think these FMV titles were kind of aimed at an all-round audience rather than just a strict hardcore gamer audience?
I'm trying to think of the gamer audience at that time. I think it was really growing. I mean, I'm not saying there were already some, maybe Amiga was out, or there were some systems that people were already playing, but it was exploding. And I think they were trying to both appeal to the gamers that already existed, but also reach out to people that maybe didn't think of themselves as gamers, but were more interested in story or actors or beautiful looking, scenes. And so I think they were trying to sort of, bring new people in and still appeal to existing gamers, and I think Myst was a pretty original type of title. I'm not sure there were other games like that before it. So even with that, they were exploring a new direction that gamers hadn't done before that. So by the time Obsidian was developed and came out, I think they were trying to move beyond strictly existing gamers and reach a broader appeal.
What about the story and kind of the world building of the game? Because I mean, it was a very big title. 5 CD-ROMs was huge for a game back then. It was very in depth. How did that kind of world building and the story come together?
Well, a lot of that was Howard Kushner and Adam working together. If you look now, I mean, it seems, our two main characters were a woman and a black man, which seems very ahead of the curve in terms of now. A lot of companies, even in their hiring, are trying to be more broad in who they appeal to and who gets featured in things. So we were just trying to go in new directions while still have an interesting story that appealed to everybody. And again, we probably did some testing on that, finding out what appealed to people, having people come in and hear the story and see a little bit of video and see if it appealed to them. So having a screenwriter there who was making sure we had an interesting story and a puzzle maker, we had Scott Kim, who's just focusing on the puzzles, and Adam, who's trying to combine all elements together. I think just the combination of those three people and what they brought to the table really made sure we hit a lot of different points.
Games engines were really important. So, point and click games, they used the Scum engine. Obsidian was one of the first companies to use the Entropolis engine. And that allowed interactive, multimedia storytelling. And what was the advantages then of using this engine and kind of having a bit of a standardization about the process?
Well, I think what they promised to do was make an engineering platform that could be ported to different platforms pretty easily. First of all, this is from memory, but as I recall, their selling point was if you use this to develop the game, you can maybe port it to different platforms. We didn't end up doing that, but I think their sales point might have been there's a bird that you can port it to different platforms. And so that's what appealed to us. And we worked tightly with them to make it work. And that also I think Thomas Dolby's company Headspace also wanted to move into an interactive, becoming more involved in interactive audio development. And I think it appealed to them as well that we were using that platform because it was easier for them to work within than other engineering platforms that they would have had to learn. So I think we saw a lot of promise in it. And obviously we released the game in it, so it worked out. I don't think in the end that company survived or went on to do that much more.
And it had a really distinctive visual style as well. I mean, that combination of realistic graphics and that kind of surreal imagery as well. So how did it work kind of collaborating with the artists and also obviously the audio composers as well to bring the game's atmosphere and mood to life?
Well, first of all, we took a lot of time. Let me say this. We didn't do this game quickly. This game took a lot of time to develop. And I recall Thomas Dolby and his team coming into our office a fair amount and seeing what we were doing. We just made sure there was a lot of back and forth. I mean, that is actually the job of a producer, is make sure that all the elements and teams on any project are in touch and collaborating and hearing each other. And so not specifically me, but I'm sure I made an effort to make sure, hey, is everybody talking, and are we meeting enough to make sure that the interactivity and the way the engineer is working and the interactivity of the music, which was very important to Thomas, was just all paid attention to, so that it felt like we were all pushing in the same direction. Unlike the earlier titles where there had been, I mean, we always were, but there was a little bit more friction between, hey, are we focusing on the gameplay, or are we focusing on the artwork as what we want to feature here? In this particular title, we were all working together to make it all work as well as possible.
With the kind of, CGI in the interactive scenes, they must have needed some big gear and, big equipment. What kind of stuff were they using?
Well, I mean, we were using, God, I'm thinking the name of the company, Silicon Graphics.
Yeah, SGI.
Yeah, we were using SGI machines, and also, but rendering now, you might know this, but you can just rent a render farm. You could upload your frames and your scenes, and you can use 1,000 machines in Germany that's cranking away on your files and then dropping them. I think we started using some render farms, but we were using SGI machines and just trying to figure out how to render. I mean, sometimes a single frame could take 15 minutes to render. And the video, let's say it's 24, 30 frames a second, that can add up to hours and weeks of time. So we learned, we built a render farm. And then I believe we started finding places online that would actually allow us to render and download the files. I know now that's very common. I'm trying to think where in the cycle of that developing Obsidian was, but it was a main challenge. But it was really exciting what the machines were capable of doing. I guess I should point out that I came from a video background where you would go into a room that you rented for like $700 an hour, and you would turn on different machines to make visual effects happen, and you were charged by the machine. That's $300 an hour. That's $200 an hour. And then I got to rocket science, and as we moved into developing Obsidian, you had software like After Effects where you could do it on your Macintosh. And I was completely blown away, having come from the video world, that now you could do very complicated effects and designs right on your computer right there. And it was exciting to be doing that, to engineer on Silicon gaming machine, on the SGIs, and using Macintoshes to develop the artwork was, at the time, pretty cutting edge.
Yeah, it's crazy to think, the price of those SGI machines as well. I mean, your iPhone's got more power than one of those these days. It's like, it's insane kind of how far we've come.
Yes, and it was expensive. I mean, you're pointing that out. Yeah, we spent a lot of money on machines, and it was exciting to be using that level of technology, which now, as you pointed out, you could do a lot of this work on a MacBook Pro.
Mm. Well, the game Obsidian got great reviews. I remember it being very, the critics loved that game. Magazines, websites at the time as well, and today it's got a massive fan base as well, really hardcore for it. But some people said the game should have been as popular and acclaimed as Myst, but I heard it fell short of sales expectations. I mean, what do you think kind of happened there? What kind of went wrong there?
Well, a couple of things. Myst hadn't even fallen off, much like Dark Side of the Moon or some albums like that stay, in the top 100 for a while. Myst stayed popular for quite a while, so it didn't really go away. And then, I think it could be that the cynicism around the rocket science company name and what we were doing meant that we didn't quite get the promotional push that we could have gotten. And, in those days, like if you didn't get on the end cap, in a store, when you walk in, there's the end cap at the end of the aisles where the featured games or records or whatever it is you're selling, they're right there and you see them. I think we were fighting to get the kind of attention in the stores and in the media that we wanted. And we wanted the focus to be less on what is rocket science doing now, given what their past is, and more just let's focus on this game. And as I recall, I think we just weren't getting the attention we wanted to get at that time. That had to do more with the history of the company, and also a lot of platforms. I'm trying to think, when did Saturn come out? But we were also fighting.
94, I think that was 94, 95. Yeah.
Yeah, I think also we were fighting with people that were wanting the attraction to the exciting, chase and shoot and find your enemy, Doom world. Those things were getting a lot of attention too. So between Myst and its popularity and the potential cynicism about the company and all the platforms exploding at the same time, I think we just got a little lost.
So how did that affect rocket science games? Because I know that, did the company cease then in 97? What kind of happened there?
We went under. I mean, I recall the game got enough success that we translated it to Japanese and German. In fact, I recall going to Japan a couple of times to supervise that. And meanwhile, the company was starting to go under. We had run out of money. We're running out of money and weren't making enough, clearly, off Obsidian to keep the company going. So it was tough, but it was successful enough that we're saying, hey, let's get this out in some other languages. So while the company was sort of on the precipice of their demise, I was deep in porting Obsidian to other languages. And in fact, I think I was one of the 10 people that sort of closed the doors literally on the space that the company was, because we just kept going on Obsidian after everything else had sort of gone away.
Well, it proves, the passion that you had for the project, and obviously the fact that, it wasn't the fault of the game, or the team. It was, a fantastic product, just like you said, that bad history of the company itself, I suppose, the reputation there. But obviously, like I mentioned, the game has got a cult following over the last 25 years or so. And Obsidian's recently been re-released for a new audience on, these new platforms, Steam and Zoom. So have you been involved in this kind of re-release then? Tell us a bit about this.
Well, basically, I kept my copies of Obsidian in Japanese and German, and when I heard that they were going to release this, I sent these along and said, "Hey, if you're already porting the English, you could port these other two." And I just helped, and also I kept a lot of the artwork. Not a lot, but I kept a fair amount of conceptual artwork, storyboards, digital paintings of things that ended up in the game. And so, I've been purging a lot of stuff lately because you do that later in life, but I kept a bunch of that and I scanned it and I got it to them. So whether or not they wanted to offer that to people that bought the game or use it on their promotions to just give people a little peek behind the scenes of what the creative side of making the game. I was glad I kept it all because I loved the game. I loved the team and the kind of artwork we made. And I was glad I hung on to this stuff. And I was thrilled if there was anybody that cared and wanted to show this to a new audience.
I think that's awesome as well that you did keep it all because, a game of that depth that had such an incredible team working on it, it is really interesting to kind of, peek behind the curtain and see how it all worked. And also, the fact that the game is now, it's so much more accessible, isn't it, to new audiences. That must be quite satisfying seeing how easy people can get hold of the game now.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see how many people want to play it. I can say that my kids, who are 20 and 23, and play much more interactive, exciting potentially exciting games where you're hunting other players and it's really about shoot and kill and making teams. They were like, "Dad, this is a slow game. Like this is puzzle solving." And I'm curious to see if this is just going to be a game that appeals to people that knew it already, or if there is an audience that's looking, because it's kind of fun to do and you can even do it with somebody else sitting next to you and try and solve the puzzles and explore the world. I'm very curious to see if there will be some interest beyond the people that wanted to play it before or played it in the past and want to play it again. If there's any potential to find a broader audience, even just for this kind of game, because I don't think Myst makes any more games. Maybe they will, but I don't know how many games of this style even are developed anymore.
Yeah, no, Myst has had a few reboots over the years. It was like a VR version of it as well a couple of years ago. But yeah, there's not many, thinking games, I suppose you could call them, these kind of logical puzzles and stuff. So I think there's definitely an audience there that if they come across it, would find it interesting for sure. And I think, for people like me that didn't have a powerful enough PC back in the day, it's quite nice to have a simple way of being able to play it now.
I can't help but wonder if it had come out during COVID. When, in 2021, when we were all stuck at home with a lot of time to kill, it would have been interesting to see if it had found a broader audience, just because people were at home looking for stuff to do.
So, after working on, such a passion project that, you really were into, and then obviously Rocket Science Games closing its doors, that must have been obviously pretty heartbreaking for everyone involved in these incredible titles and, you personally as well. What happened next then? What was kind of your journey after that then? How did you kind of keep going in the games industry and pick yourself up again?
Well, I really actually, though I stayed working in the games industry, I fell back into the video world. I can tell you, when we worked on Obsidian and Lodestar, there was a company in San Francisco that was a video post-production house called Western Images. And we would go there to work on all the video aspects that we were delivering. So doing color correction and little visual effects, and it was to make the video side of whether we were making ads or promoting the games. And when they heard we were going under, we got a call, my partner and I got a call from Western Images going, "Hey, we know you've got a great animation team, and we know you're good producers and you've worked here. Would you like to come over here? We need an animation department. We're falling behind here because we don't have animators here. And we know that you have good equipment," and they like the SGI machines because we had them. And of course, when a company goes under, they sell their equipment very cheap. So they basically called and said, "Why don't you pick the 3 or 4 best animators from your team and pick out all the best equipment, because you know what's in that office, and we will hire, you can start a department, we'll hire those animators, we'll buy the gear, and you can just come over here." So immediately after Rocket Science, we went over a place called Western Images, which is now out of business, and started their animation department. And because we had worked on video games, and people knew me and my partner from that, also Electronic Arts was really exploding in general. So Western Images, in addition to my team working on commercials and visuals for all kinds of TV ads and things like that, we started getting calls from Electronic Arts saying, "Hey, do you want to work on the open animation for this game?" There was a game called Alice that they wanted, which they wanted a beautiful opening design for. And basically, Western Images was having so much success with the commercial side of things, they weren't that interested in these game jobs, which paid pretty well, but not nearly as well as a Super Bowl commercial. So my partner and I decided to leave Western Images and start our own company called Little Beast. And then EA came to us and some of the same animators, and we started working on LucasArts games and Electronic Arts games, doing their visuals. Sometimes it was just the open close animations that introduced the game and gave the cinematic story behind it. And sometimes it was the animations that went in between the sections of the game that gave the plot, the story side, somewhere to go. And sometimes it was just making the ships and things that were in the game, and we would deliver elements, like sometimes 300 elements. So our history in the game world made us good people to work with, because we understood what a game needed to have in terms of assets, and sometimes they had limited polygons. Hey, make these simple but look good. And because we had that experience, we became a preferable company to go to make those sort of assets.
And Alice was a really interesting title as well, because that was meant to come out with a film release as well,
Yes.
America McGee's Alice.
Yes.
What was it like kind of changing styles with that?
It was fantastic.
Trying to fit less of a kind of sci-fi world.
It was fantastic. Well, first of all, I always liked the story of Alice. And one of the main animators that we worked with at Little Beast, his name was Zane Rutledge. He loved Alice. And when they came to us and said, hey, can you make an interesting open for a game called Alice that has a total dark side? And they showed us the artwork. We were thrilled that we got to move, that we both got to work on such a well-known, title. And Quincy, Alice in Wonderland is big in our culture. And yet they were taking it in a new direction visually and story-wise. So we got to work with American McGee and his producer is a great guy named R.J. Berg. They went on to team together afterwards. It was very exciting for us to work on that. And they really gave us a very long leash in terms of what did we think it needed to look like. And we worked on the sound design for it and the music. It was very exciting, really fun.
So that's interesting that you worked on the music as well, because it was Marilyn Manson was involved and Nine Inch Nails as well. It was a real kind of a dark soundtrack.
Yeah, I didn't work on it, but we went back and forth. They made the music, but we would go back and forth with them, sending them stuff in progress so they could get a sense of what it was going to look like and how it was going to move along. So there was a lot of, I always liked working in music anyway, but it was nice to have some back and forth play between, all right, we're making the visuals, you're making the music. We're not just going to deliver this to you and you're going to have to rush through it. We had some back and forth about making sure it all developed so that when we were done, it had a fantastic soundtrack, like ready to go.
Well, earlier on in the interview, you talked about, separately rendering stuff on video and, having a kind of separation between the film stuff and the game stuff. Nowadays, there's a real kind of integration of like digital assets being used in films and then being put into games and stuff. Is it a lot easier? And is there a lot more kind of work doing CG these days?
Well, it's interesting. It's all changing. First of all, the machines have gotten so powerful. Now, as we know, and people like to say the computer in your iPhone is more powerful than the computer that we took to to go to the moon. So the fact that the powerful computing is so in everybody's reach has changed everything, both in terms of filmmaking and video game making. I just think it's opened up the world to kind of like in the music biz where anybody can jump in and develop something. And now, oh, by the way, the rendering issue I mentioned, anybody can go online and instantly rent 500 machines and render frames if you need to do it. So I would just say the whole creative process has gotten much more democratic. Now, as far as the distribution of games, you still need to be a player. Just like the film biz, you can make a movie, but who's going to get it out there and promote it and get it out into the world? There's fewer and fewer companies that kind of own that power. But more and more people can make movies. And I think, not that I follow it that well, but I'm sure that's still happening in the game industry as well. In terms of more companies can just pop up with an idea and go, and you don't need to have quite the financial power behind you that we needed to have to start rocket science, because everything's much more powerful. Just that the technology is much more democratically distributed to people that want to get creative in this world.
And the whole, the film world and the game world coming together, I think, the fact that now, video games are distributed either digitally or on Blu-rays, it's you can have really high quality, pretty much as good as movies, cutscenes in them and stuff as well. So I think you definitely backed the right horse back in the early 90s, getting involved, with the video side of gaming.
Yes, and it's gone off the charts. And also everybody's looking to cross-promote. You might as well, look at how many movies are coming out based on video games. And it's because you've got a built-in audience. And because video games have gotten so big that if you can get that audience over to see your movie, even half of them, you could have a pretty successful movie. And that's also why now, it's going with everything where people, now people that make music are also trying to sell sneakers or have their music featured in a video game. I think there's a lot more crossing over from all the different entertainment genres to try and bring audiences in that otherwise, wouldn't necessarily have gone there. But now, geez, how many people want to see a movie about a video game? Quite a few.
Yeah, look at TV series like The Last of Us and stuff, it continues to be going that way now that they're making shows about games, rather than the other way around. So it's
Right.
Yeah, really interesting. And it's been great to hear your contribution to the history of gaming, Matthew. And long may your passion continue for the incredible games that you've worked on and the amazing work that you do. And it's fantastic to see that Obsidian is available for anyone to play really simply on Zoom platform and Steam as well. So I will link up those links in our show notes so anyone can just click through and check out Obsidian. Maybe people that didn't get a chance to play it back in the day or just, like the sound of it from our chat can hopefully go and see what they think of the game and play it over the weekend, hopefully. So thank you so much for coming on and reminiscing with us, Matt. It's been wonderful to talk to you.
Thank you. It was great to talk to you, and I'm looking forward to seeing how many people want to explore the Obsidian world.